Hi, this is Shauna with the Jeffco DeAngelis Foundation, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about the Principal Recovery Network and their new guide to recovery. So let me introduce you first to our national treasurer, so certainly Jeffco's treasurer, Mr. D, Frank DeAngelis.
Hi, Shauna. Thank you for allowing us to talk about the Principal Recovery Network today. I was at Columbine High School 35 years, and I started my career there back in 1979 as a teacher and a coach, and then decided to get into administration. And I was in my third year as principal, just getting ready to finish the 1999 school year. And on April 20th, 1999 came about, a day in which my life changed forever, a day in which the life of the Columbine community changed forever. And unfortunately, we had that tragedy that killed 13 of my beloved people, and something that I was never prepared for as a principal. And I can remember it was a couple of days later, I made a comment that I just joined a club in which no one wants to be a member. And I was hoping that, what happened at Columbine would not happen in other places. I hope that the ones that lost their lives at Columbine did not die in vain, but unfortunately that did not happen, and the club continued to grow. But something that was instrumental to me is I received a phone call from a gentleman named Bill Bond, who was a member of the National Association of Secondary School Principals. And he was a principal at Heath High School in Paducah, Kentucky, where a shooting had occurred in 1999. And needless to say, I was in a state of shock, not sure where to go, what was going to happen. And he said, "Frank, here's my number." He said, "You don't even know what you need, but just keep this number by." And it was probably one of the most important phone calls I received, because I did call him, things that were it seems simple, but what do you do for a graduation 1 month after that tragic event? And so that phone call had such a major impact on me. And I said, I hope I never have to make that phone call. But if some event does happen, I'm going to reach out, because I know how important it was to me. Well, unfortunately, these shootings continue to happen, and I would reach out, and it's not because it's Frank DeAngelis, but I just think because people could identify with the situation that happened at Columbine High School. And so I continued to reach out to offer support for this club that no one wanted to be a member. And it was in 2019, I received a phone call from Greg with the National Association of Secondary School Principals. And he said, "Frank, I want to run an idea by you." He asked me about this Principal Recovery Network. He said, "What do you think about bringing principals together from around the country, or administrators together, to just talk about what they experienced?" And then we formed that network, and we met in Washington, D.C. And this was prior to the pandemic. And it was just to be in that room together with my colleagues who were very dear friends of mine. We were able to share our stories, because I think a lot of times people feel that we were the only ones going through this. And so I can remember, just with the doors closed, just opening, our minds and our hearts, and it really created something special. And so that was the beginning of the Principal Recovery Network. And two very near and dear friends to me that I met out of the events that they experienced are a major part of this Principal Recovery Network. And they are really the facilitators in taking on the lead of what we're doing right now. And they're going to talk a little bit more about the Principal Recovery Network. And then I know they're going to talk about the Principal Recovery Guide. So it gives me an honor and privilege to introduce Greg Johnson from Ohio, and Elizabeth Brown, who's in Florida. So Greg, if you'd like to share with us.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for that introduction. And just thank you, Frank, for your leadership with our Principal Recovery Network, and just for educators nationwide. So my school, I'm a high school principal in West Liberty, Salem, in Ohio, and we had a shooting in January of 2017. We had one student who was critically injured, but no fatalities. And right after that happened, I know Frank reached out to us. There was a shooting that had occurred earlier in Ohio at Chardon High School, and both the principal and the assistant principal from Chardon reached out to us and just provided some guidance and some help as we were trying to decide when we were coming back to school, and how we could kind of address some of the mental and emotional and social needs of our staff and our students. And that guidance was very, very helpful. And then it wasn't too long after that where I found myself in kind of that similar position where I could reach out when there was a shooting at a high school in Kentucky. And I could reach out to the principal there at Marshall County High School. And so, I think that informal network that had slowly been forming um, was effective. But when NASSP and when Frank got together and talked about putting together this, I guess it's a much more formal step of the Principal Recovery Network, and reached out to me, I was interested in being a part of that from the beginning, not really knowing what it was going to be. But I recognize the value. So like Frank said, the Principal Recovery Network, when we first got together, we didn't really know what we were going to be other than a group of principals to sit down in a room and talk about it. And I can say from a personal level, it didn't take long that first time that we were sitting, 20 of us in a room outside of Washington, D.C., to realize that I was with a special group of people who had experienced what I experienced, not just in the day of a shooting, but the days and weeks and months. It's really a journey of recovery. And I think as a principal, as a school leader, you have a very unique perspective and a unique experience during that journey. You've got a lot of responsibilities, a lot of decision making, and you're not the only decision maker by any means, but to be able to sit around a table and look face to face to other principals who had experienced some of the same things was very powerful. Was an emotional experience, was very, very helpful to me. But as we met as a group, as a network, we really came up with two goals. We're really a twofold organization. One, we are reactive. Like, we recognize that it is when you're a principal who experiences a school shooting, it's something that you can never be prepared for. You can never be prepared for that day. And so as a network, we want to react. We want to be there. We want to reach out. And that message that we get to that principal is just what do you need? We're here. We're here to offer help, offer support, offer just an ear to listen. So that's kind of the reactionary part. But we also decided right away we wanted to be proactive. We're in a unique position where, as a network, we can advocate. We can voice our thoughts, our concerns, whether it be to local, state, or even national, federal level government officials and decision makers. So we advocate for things like increased mental health supports within schools and funding for safety and for procedures and policies. And so we've been working on that as well. But also early on as a network, we recognized that whether it was an experience that had one injury, two injury, fatalities, multiple fatalities, there were some commonalities in the experience and the recovery journey that happens afterwards. And we decided as a group that it'd be helpful if we could put some of our experiences, some of our thoughts down in paper. And really what came out of that conversation was the Guide to Recovery. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth if she could speak more to that. Elizabeth is one of our members and is a facilitator that has really taken the lead in putting that Guide to Recovery together in a way that is useful, that it can be useful to a principal who's never experienced a shooting, but could be extremely useful to a principal who's leading their school and their community through the time after a shooting. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Elizabeth, and allow her to speak to that.
Thank you, Greg, and hello, Frank.
Hi, Elizabeth.
I was similarly a school leader, but my story is a little bit different. Our particular incident happened on our campus about 60 days after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And I was not the principal at Forest High School in Marion County at that point in time. There was another school leader in charge of the school at that time. I was brought in about 45 days after the incident to take over the school. And when our deputy superintendent assigned me as principal there, he said, basically, Elizabeth, you have one job, and that is to lead this school through the healing process. Our shooting actually happened on the 19th anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting. So Frank and I share that date and in that particular incident. And a former student came on campus and opened fire in a hallway and shot through a classroom, severely injuring one student before his gun jammed, ending the attack. And so when I took over, literally, they had come to the end of the year, graduated their seniors, and everybody had gone home from the summer with still this lingering in the air. And so as I took over as a school leader, and Greg alluded to this, I had an outstanding team of professionals there with me, assistant principal team, as well as I was able to bring in an activities director that I was very familiar with and had worked with before, and an athletic director that I had worked with before. So it was a blessing to me to be able to bring some of a team that I've worked with before, and then also work together with the team that was already in place. And the very first thing I did, and this is actually part of the guide, so I'm going to segue into that, was I met with the Student Government Association and talked to them and listened to them very openly about what they wanted to see the school to look like when it reopened in August of that year. And from that point forward, I just worked with the staff, the school community, and the students to make sure that we were meeting their needs. Frank reached out to me, and then Greg also reached out to me. And to be honest, the first thing I said is, I didn't feel like I belonged in the group. I'm not sure that there were any other principals that took over after the fact. At that point in time, we since have added principals that are in that situation. But I felt like I did not belong because I was not there on the campus the day of. But as Greg mentioned, what we have found out as a group is that those days of going through the recovery, the months and years thereafter, are very similar, regardless of what the details are of the incident on campus. And so when we first met in April of 2019, I was obviously very humbled to sit in that room and meet those school leaders that had led their school through that day, as well as the recovery afterwards. But I stayed pretty quiet. And as we began to talk, Greg Wapples and I kind of talked about the fact he was taking some notes, and I was sitting near to him, and I just started taking some notes so that I would have them after the fact to refresh my memory of everything we talked about. And those notes that we took have now turned into the Guide to Recovery. And when it first started, it was very scattered notes, just very personal notes, Frank speaking to his experiences, some of the other principals speaking to their experiences, and just literally their thoughts typed on a Word document. And then as we began to talk about the fact that this was useful information, this was information that other school leaders needed, and that it could be used in a proactive way as well as a reactive way, then we began as a group to really pare down that information, put it under the subsections that you now see as the Guide to Recovery, and take out kind of the personal antidotes and all of that to make it to where it's pragmatic, solid advice for school leaders. And our hope is in releasing this, and I'm going to talk just, from the surface level, that district leaders, law enforcement agencies, superintendents, principals will look at it as they are analyzing and tweaking their school safety plans year by year, as well as it being that tool that, God forbid, a school leader that has had to go through this can pick up right at their thumb and be able to just read through it very, very quickly with just solid boots on the ground, we've been there advice. One of the pieces that I'm very committed to always talking about when we talk to different organizations about this resource, when you read it, it reads very pragmatically, very just logically. But the amount of time that went into this guide, and the amount of sacrifice, and the amount of sitting in the room with the other members of the PRN, listening to their stories, listening to them get down to the nitty gritty of what they felt and what they went through, has just been absolutely awe-inspiring for me. So whereas the tool is very general information, the heart and soul behind it are these school leaders that have lived this day with their school communities and have led their school communities through the healing process to whatever point they are at now. Because as Frank has said so many times, trauma has no timeline, and it's always lingering, it's always there, it's always a piece of who that school community would be, or will be. So when you read it, I read it with a very different view, because I sat in the room with these leaders, and I saw their tears, and I saw their hesitancy to come forward with their thoughts and their processes. And eventually we all just kind of became family, and it became a very open forum for people to talk and to go through that and pick out what school leaders need to know. So in our panel that we did a couple of weeks ago, to me, it's the truest form of sacrificial leadership, with obviously Frank at the helm of that. He is 100% our leader and our guide through all of this. And we could not be more appreciative of him.
Wow, that is that's the endorsement that we agree with as well. Thank you, Elizabeth and Greg and Frank. Thank you so much again. This is another incredible resource. So that tool for recovery is just 100% crucial, and we are grateful for your work and everything that you've done for everyone.
Well, you know, and it's all about partnerships, and just being able to work with Greg and Elizabeth and the other members is so important. And I think it was and Elizabeth made reference to this when we were talking, when we did our panel back in Colorado at the Columbine Memorial. And one of the things that we talked about is, even with everything that people have gone through with the pandemic, there were things in there, how to, you know, just things that they could use. For example, graduation. I don't know how many graduations had to go virtual, but how do you do things with graduation or things of that nature? So this is more, I think this guide can reach out and help people in all circumstances other than just the people that have gone through school shootings. And, you know, one of the things that we realized, and my life has truly been blessed by meeting these wonderful principals I get to work with. They're all of our kids. You know, and it doesn't matter if it's Colorado or Florida or Ohio. And you don't realize the importance of this guide, but it was a couple of weeks ago, I received a phone call where there was a student that was stabbed, and the principal called up, and that student died. And this principal was just in a state of shock, not sure what to do. And the first thing that I did in having a conversation with him and the deputy superintendent is I referred them to the principal recovery guide. Within 24 hours, they got back to me and said, thank you. We didn't even think about that. And it's there for them. So this is a working guide. We know it's working. And, you know, we have people that are just really, they want to use this. And as Greg pointed out so brilliantly, you know, it's being more proactive than reactive. And so hopefully principals are reading this, superintendents are reading this, school board members, because it really does help communities. And we all, you know, I think of some of the things we went through with Columbine, and I'm sure Greg and Elizabeth can talk about the same things. You learn some things and things you would do differently. And hopefully this guide at least gives them something to think about. So, and we're just happy to be able to partnership with the Jeff DeAngelis Foundation, because I think we can do a lot of great work together.
Agreed. Well, thank you. It's an incredible tool. We're grateful for all of you. Thank you so, so much.